Hello everyone, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Um, Welcome to the 15th Ako Para sa Bata. I am for the Child Conference. I am Dr. Ria Cruz, Chair of Ako Para sa Bata Session 3, and I am delighted to be your host today. The Child Protection Network Foundation is celebrating the 15th year of the Ako Para sa Bata Conference, a continuing education for individuals and professionals in the front line of child protection network. Good morning again. So ang ating session ay session 3, ang kahalagahan ng kalusugan ng isipan ng mga bata sa kasalukuyang panahon. Current mental health concerns of the Filipino child. Welcome again, dear Ako Para sa Bata community. This session, we aim to emphasize the need for collaborative effort and approach in the mental health care of children, adolescents, and young adults. We have three learning outcomes to respond appropriately to the signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression, to be able to describe effective evidence-based prevention and interventions at different levels of care and settings, and to be able to review online resources for patient education, self-care, and referrals. I'd like to show you the outline of the session. So today's session aims to cover the different mental health issues that concern our children, teens, and young adults. Strategies, support, and health-seeking behavior available in the different settings will be highlighted, especially in the school, the child's second home, and emphasis on the teacher's role in safeguarding the student's mental health being. The role of the physician in the prevention and management of mental health issues will be cascaded to the other advocates to foster collaboration on mental health problems. We have resource persons from the Society of Adolescent Medicine of the Philippines Incorporated and the Philippine Society of Adolescent Medicine Specialists, consultants from the Philippine Children's Medical Center and other institutions. They are all staunch advocates on mental health programs and active contributors on adolescent training modules and programs. So another interesting and well-attended session. We hope that you can take in as much knowledge as you can. I would not keep you from waiting for you to be able to watch all the three sessions within the prescribed time. Let us proceed with the first speaker. Our first speaker is involved in research-based adolescent program initiatives. She's a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist, a fellow of the Philippine Pediatric Society, and a diplomate of the Philippine Society of Adolescent Medicine Specialists. She's also a consultant at the Philippine Children's Medical Center, St. Luke's Medical Center, Quezon City, and the Medical City Ortigas. To present the epidemic of loneliness in children and teens, let us hear from Dr. Darlene R. Pecache.
Hello, everyone. I am Darlene Pecache. I am a pediatrician and an adolescent medicine specialist. It's nice to be with you today, all passionate advocates for our children. And I'd like to thank the Child Protection Network for inviting me to be part of this year's Ako Para sa Bata series of webinars. So for this morning, here are my objectives. The Epidemic of Loneliness, which is the title of my lecture. And an interesting title, and I'd like to give you a short background on this before we delve deeply into my lecture objectives. So in May of this year, the US Surgeon General released an advisory entitled Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation, which for the information of everybody, the U.S. Surgeon General is the nation's doctor, so to speak. He provides Americans with the best scientific information available on how to improve their health and reduce their risk of illness and injury. So the Office of the Surgeon General is actually part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So yeah, just a quick background. So he says that how we communicate with one another for the past years has shifted from in-person to online, which is evident in our lives here in the Philippines as well, and that there are physical health consequences of poor connection, which include an increased risk of heart disease, stroke, and even dementia for older adults. And in the end, he says that how meaningful connections are central to one's physical and mental health. About a week ago, it was World Mental Health Day, and aptly so, we've talked about mental health of our children during the past weeks of Ako Para sa Bata. And we know how our children face new challenges post-pandemic, if I may say. And in addition to the normal stresses common for each age group. For example, our adolescents who are in the process of forming their identities or figuring out who they are as individuals, where they fit in or how to fit in, which is separate from their families, as expected. What happened was that after the pandemic, they are immediately thrust back into intense peer group situations with social skills that are unpracticed at best. Remember, we were doing online class for more than 2 years. So if these kids are not integrating well, it can lead to mental health issues like depression, despair, and loneliness, which my colleagues have discussed as well. From studies in child development, we know that the foundation for a sound mental health is built early in life as early experiences. So we talk about a young child's relationships with parents, caregivers, relatives, and as they get older, relationships with teachers and peers. Disruptions in this developmental process impairs a child's capacity to learn and even relate to others, which has lifelong complications. A sound mental health provides a foundation of stability. So that's the key word, stability. It supports all other aspects of human development, from friendships to their abilities to cope with difficulties, to achieving success in school and even in work, and achieving success as well with the community. So let's have an example. No, let's take a look at this wobbly table. No, itong table na to na umuuga, it does not function well, no? See how it wobbles? The floor, we don't know why, no, but the floor may be uneven, that's why it wobbles. The legs may not be aligned, hindi pantay-pantay yung legs. The tabletop may also not be leveled, so it's wobbling. So the problems in mental health can be caused by many interdependent factors. Just as small wobbles, itong mga factors na nakita natin sa table, these small wobbles can become bigger and even more difficult to fix. So yung table na yan, yun nga na umuuga hanggang sa huli, pwede siyang masira. So before it gets difficult to fix, no, the management of mental health concerns in our children requires early identification of the causes, which include the environment, the child, or most frequently both. So let's talk about the child and the environment. Mental health problems can and do occur in young children. And these have serious consequences, no, as I've mentioned, for early learning, for their social competence, and affects their lifelong physical health. Impairment in mental health is a result of genetic predispositions and at the same time, exposure to adversity in the environment. So when we talk about genetic predisposition, these are genes, no, that tell our bodies how to function, and sustained stress-inducing experiences early in the life of a child can lay an unstable foundation for mental health, according to studies. And this unstable foundation can endure and persist into the adult years. So we're talking about, for example, toxic stress. This is a result of strong, strong and frequent, prolonged biological responses to adversity. Toxic stress from studies can damage the architecture of a developing brain of a child and increases their likelihood of significant mental health problems. So because of the effect of toxic stress on the brain, no, they, like I said, it can impair their ability to be ready for school, impairs their achievements, achieving academic achievements, both physical and mental health in children and later on. So what are these toxic stress? No, to name a few, and very commonly, no, these are life circumstances associated with family stress. So we talk about poverty that they face, unsafe neighborhoods that our kids live in, poor childcare conditions as well, then definitely abuse and neglect, are sources of toxic stress. We talk about domestic violence as well, and parental mental health, or parents' substance abuse. These all make our children vulnerable to mental health problems. So when a child is in a relationship or in a family that is abusive, threatening, or chronically neglectful or harmful, no, psychologically, these are risk factors for development of early mental health problems. In contrast, when a child is in a relationship that is reliably responsive and supportive, they can actually buffer young children from the adverse effects of other stressors. So it protects them, no, from these stressors. Therefore, we want to reduce the stressor affecting our kids to address, no? And this requires addressing the stress within the family and the environment. From some studies I've read, some children actually overcome, no, challenges of early, for example, persistent abuse, no, trauma or emotional health or emotional harm early in life. But even when they have been removed from adversities, they may also develop problems for example, self-regulation. They're not able to adapt emotionally, and they have problems in relating to others and even understanding themselves. So what is important is that we see the prevention and timely intervention in circumstances that put our children at serious psychological risk is very important. We talk about timely intervention. It's essential to address young children's mental health problems. But we have to consider this within the context of their families, no? So we take into consideration definitely their families, their homes, and their communities. So we've talked about the young child, no, the young children. Let's now talk about our teens, no, our adolescents, which is the special population that I work with. So for our adolescents, it's a normal part of their development to experience, no, for our teens to experience a wide range of emotions. For example, a teen may feel anxious about school one day, or anxious about meeting new friends in school, or even experience depression following the loss of a loved one, for example. But mental health disorders are characterized by, and these are the red flags that I'm sure that my colleagues have discussed, no? Mental health disorders are described as having persistent symptoms that affect how a young person feels, how he thinks and acts. These mental health conditions interfere with regular activities and daily functioning, such as their relationships, their schoolwork. It even affects their sleep and their eating patterns. And this was discussed in the other webinars. And we all know that mental health has raised concern globally, throughout the years of the pandemic and post-pandemic, as we are in it, with the lingering effects of school closures that we had, social isolation that we all experienced, and other pandemic-related stressors. So these are the stressors our adolescents are facing, to name a few, and may include number one, overwhelming pressure to figure out their future. I actually heard one of my colleagues in her lecture last week that this is, a concern of our adolescents, and she was right. It's the pressure that they have to do good in school, that they feel that they have to adjust again to in-person school, to reintegrate, no, to face-to-face schooling, and just, the overall pressure to keep up with the academic load that they have, or even to be best in school or extracurricular curricular activities. Another stressor may be the academic schedules that take toll on their physical and mental health. They are more busy nowadays. They sometimes do not even have time to rest or relax. Next is bullying. We all know this is a source of stress, whether in person or most commonly now via social media. It's definitely a risk factor for our teens to have for mental health problems. Persistent fears, no? An unstable home environment can cause stress for our teens. Financial instability in the family, not being able to have nutritious food on their tables, and other issues that weigh them down. For some, it is discrimination, no? So we talk about discrimination based on their gender or sexual orientation, based on their religion, or even their disability, which can affect these adolescents as they, face adversities. Last is social media. As they spend, we know that they spend a lot of time on Instagram, TikTok, and others. And we're still learning about the ways social media can affect the health of our children and our teens. And this is an entirely different webinar altogether. So yeah, so healthy use can foster positive connections, no? So that's the benefit, no, of social media. But we know that some young people also face greater risks for the negative effects of social media. My other colleagues have talked about mental health challenges that our children, our teens face, including anxiety, depression, and suicide. So for the next objective or the next part of my lecture, we're going to talk about suicide prevention in schools. So this was a recent update from the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. This is actually called the Blueprint for Youth Suicide Prevention, which I believe came out a year ago. Probably, yeah, a year ago. Or maybe 2 years ago. I'm not sure. But yeah, this is, you can have the link here that you can check. And actually, they're saying, no, AAP and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, they're stating that suicide is complex. No, we all know that. We've discussed that, but often preventable. No, and as we all work with children and adolescents, whether we are in the health sector, in the academe, no, we're social workers, in the legal world, no, law enforcement as well, we all play a critical role in identifying and supporting our youth who are at risk for suicide. So this blueprint for youth suicide prevention was designed to support health clinicians in preventing suicide. So there are different strategies, no, if you go to the website. But for today, we will be talking about the prevention in the school setting, which is, as you see, part of the blueprint. So our youth have different opportunities, no, and they experience a lot in school. No, although in school there may be barriers, no, to mental health. That's what the blueprint says. This is due to social factors, no, community resources, to name a few. They may face these barriers to mental health because of ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender identity, which I mentioned a while ago was a source of stress, discrimination towards those with special healthcare needs, language differences, and schools who have limited resources. These actually put the youth at risk, no, for discrimination or long-standing health, and may affect their development and increase their risk for suicide. So suicide prevention is an ongoing process. Efforts, no, we want it to work best when there is an ongoing relationship and evaluation and improvement over time. And schools, no, play an important role in this collaborative work to promote and support the mental health of our children and adolescents. Studies actually show that school connectedness is described as the degree to which young people feel that adults and peers at school care about them. Di ba ang ganda? They care about them and are invested in their success. So that's the definition of school connectedness. This is a key contributor to mental health. When our teens and children in school feel that they're connected, they have fewer problems, no, according to a study, fewer problems with substance use, for fewer problems with suicidality, and even risky sexual behavior. Outside the clinical setting, as we work with our children, no, and adolescents, we understand that there are unique ways that mental health is impacted in it at various stage of growth. It's also important that schools, no, engage in cross-sector involvement within the community. So this collaboration involves, as you can see in the drawings here, in the pictures here, we have the school, we have the community partners, we have the health sector, we have those who um, are in youth groups, no, lawmakers, and definitely child protection or child advocates, because these community partnerships can form a safety net for youth who are at risk for suicide. A few things that AAP has suggested in the blueprint is that we have to discuss challenges in relating to how in relation to how we support our students who are struggling with mental health issues. No, are there any programs and resources that the school can tap outside? Also, is there a suicide risk screening program? My colleague will be talking about the ASK or the ASQ, the Ask Suicide Screening Questions, which is a suicide screening tool that can be used for our children, for our adolescents. So what's important is to have a policy. That's what AAP also is saying, which may include the following. First, like I mentioned, review, no, what are the needs of the school? Then we create a crisis team. We may have a committee for suicide prevention and wellness. Definitely, the staff should be trained on suicide prevention. And we have to help our teachers and other staff to create a supportive environment, or supportive classrooms for students who are in distress. Again, partnerships can be done in order to guide schools in creating policies. This is an example from abroad, no, of a school policy from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. The general ideas definitely will apply to our local setting. I am providing you the link, no, the letters in blue for your reference. So just to give us an idea of how the policy may be created, of course, tailor-made to our respective school settings. From the same society, you can find as well a toolkit, no, for schools that offers best practices to help them in case of a suicide, no, in the aftermath of a suicide. It includes crisis response, helping students cope, working with the community and the media. Again, this may be downloaded. I have the link here for your reference. So what schools can do now? Schools should have evidence-based suicide prevention and definitely include in their curriculum the social emotional learning. We want to have mental health discussions, no, positive behavioral interventions, and support. We want to be able to talk about mental health, something that we consider as strengths based. No, we also can talk about values based lectures, resilience lectures, and even help seeking behaviors. And definitely, we want them we want to talk about healthy coping and belonging. We also in our schools would like to have support groups, no, peer groups among the students to create, like I mentioned, a safe classroom, a safe environment, a safe culture in our schools. This is important because we want to make the classrooms feel safe for our students. Also, we want, like I mentioned, partner with other youth or peer advocates to be able to help our children, our teens in school. So talking about suicide with friends and peers. So for students, it's this shows us how to ask, no, about suicidal thoughts. This is in English, but we can definitely get some tips from this website. It tells us on how to listen, how to listen without judgment, and definitely, no, when to seek help from an adult. So how to help as a peer and just letting them know you don't have to do this alone and that help should be sought after, no, and to be able for our kids to reach out to the adults. So locally, so I'm gonna just a quick um tips, no, from a local high school that's been having a mental health program for their students. They are fortunate to have guidance counselors who provide the faculty, no, with training on how to handle mental health issues and even suicide. They also collaborate for with faith-based groups, no? These groups volunteer to provide activities for our students. For some kasi, di ba, faith is a source of strength, no? NGO or foundations also help this school by providing not just financial support but mental health support for students. Let's tap the alumni groups like this school has been doing. Alumni groups also provide programs addressing mental health needs, like giving out lectures to students and parents. Collaboration again with the hospital. No, this school has been doing this. They've been collaborating with the hospital that provides counseling for children and adolescents. And most importantly, the let's involve the parents. No, the role of our PTAs is very important in addressing, no, the mental health needs of our students. So for the key points of my lecture, no, we've talked about early experiences that shape the architecture of our kids developing brain. So we talk about relationships with parents, caregivers, teachers, and peers, and improving their environments of relationship and experiences early in life can prevent difficulties, no, from affecting them and their mental health. Social connectedness is also important for our health. This is based on the title of my lecture. And lastly, last key point is that suicide prevention in schools involves policy making, training, mental health education of our students and our staff, and even their families. And it should also be a conscious effort to address the problems of our students by working as a team and collaborating with mental health workers. These are my references. Thank you everyone for listening. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Dr. Darlene, for giving us a peek of our teens' lives as they navigate through these unprecedented times. We now move on to our next resource person. He is a staunch advocate on mental health programs as an active contributor on adolescent training programs and modules. Dr. De Guzman is a member of the Philippine Pediatric Society and past president of the Society of Adolescent Medicine of the Philippines Incorporated. He is currently the Department Manager of Education and Training here in PCMC to present the lecture entitled Mind Their Minds, Providing Mental Health Support to Suicidal Adolescents and Young Adults. Let us welcome Dr. Moses de Guzman III.
Good day, everyone. I am Dr. Moses de Guzman III, an adolescent medicine specialist. I am tasked to discuss with you how to provide mental health support to suicidal adolescents and young adults. The following are the objectives of my talk. Suicide is defined as the act of deliberately killing oneself. It is an act of inflicting self-harm with evidence of intent to die. Suicide has no single cause. It happens when stressors and health issues converge, creating an experience of hopelessness and despair. There are no specific signs or clinical manifestations which could point to suicidal ideation and suicide. However, there are several risk factors which increases the likelihood of suicide. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have identified factors contributing to suicide risk. The risk factors can be classified into three: individual factors, relationship factors, community and societal factors. There is no single risk factor for suicide. Usually, it is an interplay of several risk factors. A previous suicide attempt is an individual risk factor. Having a mental health condition like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, conduct disorder, personality traits of aggression, mood changes, and poor relationships. Pathologic internet use correlates with suicidal ideation and NSSI. There is the availability of information about suicide in the internet, which are readily accessible to adolescents and young adults. Pro-suicide websites and online suicide pacts facilitate suicidal behavior among at-risk adolescents and young adults. Relationship risk factors include adverse childhood experiences like history of abuse, neglect, trauma, and bullying. A family history of suicide and family or peer conflicts are risk factors. Examples of community and societal factors are barriers to healthcare, stigma associated with mental health and health seeking, access to firearms and drugs, exposure to another person's suicide, or graphic or sensationalized accounts of suicide, stressful life events like rejection, financial crisis, life transitions, and loss, systemic trauma or marginalizing experiences are prolonged stress based on socioeconomic factors, race, ethnicity, or gender or sexual identity. Aside from risk factors, there are also protective factors which lowers the risk for suicide. Considered protective are coping and problem-solving skills, connection with family, friends, and community, having supportive relationships, access to mental health care, and being proactive about mental health. No or limited access to lethal means. Spirituality are cultural or religious beliefs that encourage connecting and help seeking or create a strong sense of purpose or self esteem. Most adolescents and young adults who died by suicide displayed some warning signs and changes in behavior. It must be emphasized, though, that not all who are at risk of suicide will show warning signs, and not all adolescents and young adults who exhibit these behaviors are at risk for suicide. Some of these warning signs include talking about killing oneself, feeling hopeless, feeling like a burden, having no reason to live, mood changes like depression, anxiety, and agitation, increased substance use, withdrawing from activities, isolating from family and friends, sleeping too much or not enough, giving away prized possessions, irritability. Aside from knowing the risk factors and warning signs of suicide, it is important to identify whether someone has specific mental health needs. We should conduct a suicide inquiry. Majority of people who die by suicide visited a healthcare provider within months prior to their death. A healthcare visit is a great opportunity to identify those at risk and connect them with mental health resources. The Joint Commission, the accrediting organization for healthcare programs in hospitals across the United States, issued a Sentinel event alert recommending that all medical patients in all medical settings like inpatient, outpatient, and emergency departments should be screened for suicide risk. Using a valid suicide risk screening tool that have been tested in the medical setting and with adolescents and young adults will help healthcare workers detect who is at risk and who needs further intervention. The Ask Suicide Screening Questions, or ASK, is a suicide screening tool for AYAs in the medical setting. The ask consists of 4 yes or no questions that identify individuals who require further mental health or suicide safety assessment. When screening AYAs, it is recommended that it is conducted with the patient alone. The parents or guardians should not be present. There is a Filipino version of the ask, which was validated by Dr. Reyes Picache. The Filipino ask has acceptable content and face validity, and its contract validity is acceptable. Any yes is a positive screen. Patients who screen positive should be further assessed by a trained health worker. Further assessment can be done using the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, or CSSRS. The CSSRS is administered by a health worker. It distinguishes between suicidal ideation and behavior and helps in stratifying risk and treatment of planning. When using the CSSRS, always ask questions number 1 and 2. Question number 1 asks, have you wished you were dead or wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? Question number 2 asks, have you actually had any thoughts of killing yourself? If yes, to question number two, then you need to ask all the remaining questions. But if the answer to number two is no, then you should go directly to question number six, which asks, have you done anything, started to do anything, or prepared to do anything to end up your life? The reply to the different questions will help the health worker categorize the risk. Once the risk is determined, the interventions depending on the risk are included. For example, those who are stratified as high risk would need counseling, psychoeducation, and inpatient safety planning, admission with a psych referral, or same-day OPD consult with a psychiatrist. Those who are classified as medium risk would need counseling, psychoeducation, and outpatient safety planning with OPD referral to a psychiatrist. Those who are classified as low risk would need counseling, psychoeducation, and outpatient safety planning with possible referral to a psychologist, school counselor, or psychiatrist. Those who are classified as possible NSSI behavior would depend on the clinical judgment of the health worker, which should follow the recommendations for either high risk or medium risk. As healthcare providers, we do not stop with screening young people for suicide. There are ways to approach a suicidal adolescent. We can counsel a suicidal adolescent utilizing several methods when collecting case history data. While conversing with an adolescent, healthcare workers can provide guidance. You can say, you must be really suffering deeply for you to be thinking of hurting yourself. It is very important that suicidal thoughts or comments should never be dismissed as unimportant. We should acknowledge the seriousness of their pronouncement. It is important to acknowledge the despair of the young person, then give reassurance that the pleas for help are heard and help will be sought. You may say, you are not alone in this. I'm here for you. I may not understand exactly how you feel, but I care about you and I want to help. The family of the adolescent are allies. There is a need to tell the patient about the need to inform the family about the suicidal ideation in order to facilitate further management. You may say, as I said earlier, I have to inform your family about these suicidal thoughts so we can enlist them in a plan that can keep you safe. I will only communicate what is necessary. The health worker can promote health and prevent suicide by encouraging physical activity, adequate sleep, healthy eating habits, positive communication, strong peer and family relationships, age-appropriate problem-solving strategies. We also need to provide psychoeducation. We need to emphasize the understanding of suicide as a medical emergency and depression as a medical illness. We should explain that emotions and cognitions are served by the brain, which function as a result of a delicate balance of chemicals called neurotransmitters. We must emphasize the seriousness of the situation and at the same time reassure that treatments for depression and suicide are available and effective. As healthcare professionals, we have to be calm and composed in the face of varying reactions from the family. Healthcare professionals need to develop a referral network which should include mental health professionals. High-risk patients need to be seen by a psychiatrist ASAP. If it cannot be done, the safest course of action is to admit the patient in a hospital. For medium risk patients, referral for outpatient consult with a psychiatrist can be done. The health professional is advised to facilitate the process of arranging the referral. Low risk patients can be referred to a psychologist or guidance counselor. All interventions should be noted in the patient's records for legal purposes. Safety planning is an important component in the management of suicidal adolescents. It is a systematic approach to maintain safety. The goal is to provide the suicidal patient with specific coping strategies and sources of support in times of crisis. How is safety planning done? First, teach the adolescent how to recognize warning signs. These could include thoughts, mood, behaviors, or situations they associate with suicide. Second, identify coping strategies. What can the patient do in order to cope? Third, identify whom to contact and what can be done to distract the suicidal adolescent. Fourth, make a list of people who can help the adolescent when they are suicidal. Fifth, provide the young person with the contact details of mental health professionals. Lastly, it is important to keep the environment of the adolescent safe by reducing possible lethal means. Make sure to keep them away from firearms and other lethal means. The importance of psychosocial support cannot be overemphasized. The family is the primary source of support of most young people. Good family relationships and stability contribute to helping the patient recover. Family support and involvement is vital to the success of treatment. Aside from the family, peers are also good sources of support. It should be remembered that during adolescence, teens rely more on their peers rather than their parents. Emotional and psychological support from friends appears to safeguard against suicide. The school is also a source of psychosocial support for young people. School connectedness, sports involvement, and academic achievement can reduce a teen's risk. The community can likewise provide psychosocial support to suicidal adolescents. There are suicide hotlines available. The media should be properly utilized to help educate the public regarding mental health and suicide. Church and religious organizations can also provide psychosocial support. Here are some suicide hotlines which you may share. In summary, I discussed the different risk factors and warning signs of suicide among adolescents and young adults. In order to prevent suicide, it is important to identify those at risk and need intervention. Different ways to support adolescents and young adults and their families during a suicide crisis were likewise discussed. Before I end, it is worth to note that suicide has no single cause. There are several risk factors which increases the likelihood of suicide. Not all who are at risk of suicide will show warning signs, and not all who exhibit these signs are at risk for suicide. A healthcare visit is a great opportunity to identify those at risk and connect them with mental health resources. Care for suicidal adolescents may be improved with the health worker's knowledge, skills, and comfort with the topic. Here are my references. I would like to thank the organizers of the 2023 Ako Para sa Bata for having a forum to discuss this important topic. Thank you also to everyone for spending some time to watch and listen. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Dr. De Guzman. It was a very nice lecture. You have given us a thorough review on mental health, and I hope you have lessened our participants' apprehensions in handling such cases. Let us now proceed to the final presentation. Our next presenter, our next speaker, is an active member and facilitator of the Philippine Pediatric Society Task Force on Mental Health. And she's also an adolescent medicine specialist here in PCMC. She's the training officer of the Adolescent Medicine Division. To present Going Back to Basics, Building Psycho-Emotional Resilience Among Children and Teens Post-Pandemic, please give a warm welcome to Dr. Deborah Red.
Good day, everyone. Let's go back to basics. Building psycho-emotional resilience among children and teens post-pandemic. This, I think, is very important as we return back to normal. I'm Dr. Deborah Red, a pediatrician and an adolescent medicine specialist. So what to expect for this lecture? We will review key stressors faced by children and teens during pandemic and the consequences to mental health. Then we will go straight into the importance of psycho-emotional resilience, ways how to build it, including, of course, some positive coping strategies that can be of help. There's no doubt that the pandemic hurt children and teens. So what do we know? The effect of pandemic can be summarized in the following key areas: changes in the routine, breaks in the continuity of learning as they stop going to school, and even when they transitioned to online class, it was still different from what they used to have. They have also missed significant life events such as their graduation, prom, and birthdays. Also, there have been breaks in the continuity of healthcare, and those of us in the medical field have felt the impact. The once familiar sense of security and safety was lost, leaving many feeling vulnerable and uncertain. So, what do we know now? Based on data collected by researchers and published in journals, the pandemic did have a negative impact on mental health, and this is especially true for teenagers. Specifically, there is an increase in mental health disorders, namely anxiety, depression, PTSD, and suicide ideation. The overall stress increase around family with parents as the main issue. There is also stress brought about by virtual learning, with children and teens having problems about their grades or their academic performance. For middle to late adolescents, many would experience anxiety about their future. The life satisfaction and overall well-being decrease, while risk behaviors among teens increase. What is very notable with the transition back to school is the decrease in the sense of belonging and decreased feeling of connection with peers. Considering these impacts of the pandemic, it has become increasingly evident that there is a growing need for psycho-emotional resilience. Now, let's begin by defining what psycho-emotional resilience is. This is the ability to adapt and bounce back mentally or emotionally from negative experiences such as stress, adversity, or trauma. Resilience does not mean ignoring problems or suppressing negative emotions, but rather, resilience enables us to face challenges head on and find ways to persevere. As you can see in this slide, psycho-emotional resilience is like this determined plant pushing through these rocks or barren woods and finding its way to grow. What is the importance of psycho-emotional resilience? By teaching psycho-emotional resilience at an early age, parents can help their children build a foundation for happiness and well-being later in life. Resilient children are also more likely to take healthy risks. So, what is healthy risk? This is the kind of risk that helps them learn because they can bounce back from setbacks and are not afraid of failure. The responses of children to stress can vary depending on many factors, no, like the degree of trauma, family situation, and age of the child. For very young children, they may not be able to articulate their anxieties, but they may react by demonstrating the following behaviors like separation anxiety, excessive crying or screaming, changes in eating habits, new fears like fear of the dark or uh, strangers. Older children might demonstrate the following in response to stress: fear or anxiety, difficulty concentrating, sleep issues such as nightmares, stomach pain, headaches, aggressive behavior, or regression to younger behaviors such as bedwetting. On the other hand, when resilient children face a challenging or traumatic event, they might show minimal stress or minimal effect on their everyday life, or they might temporarily have trouble coping, but they soon return fully to their normal level of functioning. Resilience does not mean that young people won't experience difficult times or won't feel negative emotions. Resilient children know how to manage sadness and anxiety, use healthy coping strategies, and make wise choices. How then do we build resilience in children? There are seven components of resilience, or what we call the seven C's of resilience. We have competence, confidence, connection, character, contribution, coping, and control. So we will take a look at each of them and discuss briefly how we can engage with children and teens to help them develop each of these components of resilience. First, we have competence. This refers to the child's ability to handle challenging situations on their own. How can parents care and caregivers develop their children's sense of competence? By allowing them to make their own decisions and encouraging them to do things independently. Another is confidence. Confidence is similar to competence, and this refers to teaching children to believe in themselves. They need confidence to be able to recover from setbacks or stress. Some ways to develop confidence in our children would be to encourage them to try new things. Also, it's important to praise their efforts even when they don't succeed, in order to boost their confidence. Next is connection. Connection is the sense of security that comes from close and healthy relationships with family, friends, or the community. How to help children develop connections? Children form connections when they spend quality time with other people and develop close ties with them. Also, connection is fostered if they are allowed to express their emotions freely. This sense of security and connectedness give children strong foundation and supportive networks so that they will be better prepared to overcome obstacles and act independently in the world. Another is character. Good character in a child refers to their integrity, responsibility, and fundamental sense of right and wrong. And these values form the basis for making wise choices when faced with difficult situations. So we help children develop or build character by encouraging them to be caring and demonstrating to them that individuals' actions and behaviors affect those around them. Next is contribution. Contribution is when a child does things to make the world better because they feel it's important and meaningful. So, teaching even very young children how they can contribute to the world around them can give them a strong sense of purpose and meaning. So, parents and caregivers can encourage children to make good contributions by helping them identify and consider other people's needs and feelings and emphasizing the importance of treating others kindly. Next, we have coping. Coping refers to the mechanisms that people utilize to deal with stressful situations in a healthy way. Children who are able to cope are more prepared to deal with difficult situations later in their lives and will be less likely to fall into negative behaviors. So, how then do we help children handle stress? By teaching them healthy coping strategies and modeling how to remain calm and cope with stress in a positive way. Last but not the least is control. A child experiences a sense of control when they can recognize that they can affect situations in their lives. So, what does that mean? Children are more likely to bounce back from difficulties when they realize that they have some control over the outcome. So, how do we teach kids about control? So, we can do this by showing how our actions affect our situations and teaching them how they can make a difference themselves. So, as summary, parents can build resilience in their children by encouraging and creating opportunities for them to practice these seven concepts of resilience. So, I've discovered this article, which I believe serves as a practical guide for assisting parents in developing their child's resilience. So this introduces the PRO framework, where PRO stands for play, relationships, observation, and experience. So these are the ways that children interact with their environment. We will briefly explore how we can focus on all these categories. So we can assist our children in developing psycho-emotional resilience. First is play. Play allows children to explore their creativity, practice new skills, and develop fundamental sense of self. Through play, children develop competence and confidence. They also develop connection as they spend quality time with other people. They also learn sense of control. Okay, so they know they control how high they play with their blocks of Lego, for example, or control over their interactions with other people. So, example, a play will be fun or frustrating depending if they cooperate or play roughly. Now, let's go to relationships. Relationships serve as the foundation for children's self awareness and understanding of others. Spending quality time with family and important individuals will help develop a sense of connection. Relationships also teach the child proper coping if parents serve as role model in managing stress calmly and effectively. In essence, through relationships, children learn to develop resilience. Now, let us go to observation. Observation through all the senses helps children learn how people interact with their environment and how their actions can impact the world. A child learns character, coping, and control by watching adults exemplify all these virtues. Next is experience. Experiences with the world around them help children build knowledge and developmental abilities. They learn and adapt their thinking with each new experience, and they develop problem solving skills. So, with experiences, they can become resilient because through experiences, they develop competence, confidence, and the value of contribution. They also learn coping and control, which are both important components of resilience, as we have discussed earlier. So the resilience skills we discuss will play important role to these children, teens, as they transition back to school. What are the tips that we can give to help not only the children and teens, but parents as well in coping with stress and worries as they transition back to school? What teachers can do, they can work to establish connections between parents and the school program. That includes setting up times for parents and teachers to meet and get to know each other. They can also create daily structure and routines to help children learn what to expect, as well as share information with parents of returning children about daily routines to help prepare their child for what to expect. They can provide frequent communication to parents about their children's time in school, either by holding in person meetings or virtual connections. How about for parents? What can parents do? Simply by making sure that their children have a daily predictable routine with regular times for healthy meals, naps, and night sleep at home. So these are very important. Parents can also connect with other parents who have children in the same school who can provide information and make them more comfortable with the school program. Also, try to stay calm and reassuring during transition using calm voice with a relaxed face and body to let their child know that they would not leave them if the child were not safe and protected. And as was mentioned a while ago, parents should talk with their children about what to expect and help them with strategies to manage stress and cope with worries. It is also important to make sure that their child is seen regularly for the well visits with their healthcare provider. So, how about those parents with concerns? Of course, it's a must that they take care of themselves during stressful times. so that they can be better equipped to take care of others. Being equipped would mean having the knowledge. So parents should find resources to learn how to promote resilience and reduce anxiety in children. Of course, talk to a healthcare professional if their child's symptoms of anxiety or behavior problems are severe or persistent. So this slide contains the coping skills toolkit that can be used to help children and teens during stressful times. But for the interest of time, I will no longer go into details. No? You can find the details and videos even in the National Academic Press website. So one coping skill technique is the belly breathing for younger children, or we call it deep breathing for teens. So I'm sure you're familiar with this already. Another coping skill is for younger children to do fun activities with their parents, or for teens to increase their favorite activities. A technique to calm the mind is the 5-4-3-2-1 mindfulness exercise. So this is a grounding technique to help individuals stay present in the moment and reduce stress or anxiety. So it involves using the five senses, no? As you can see in this slide. Another coping is the catch, check, and change your thought. This is a cognitive behavioral coping skill used to manage and reframe negative or unhelpful thoughts. You catch or identify negative or irrational thoughts as they occur. Once you caught the negative thought, you check it for accuracy and validity. You assess whether the thought is based on facts or if it's an irrational or exaggerated belief. Then, if you determine that the thought is irrational or unhelpful, you work to change it. You replace the negative thought with a more balanced, positive, or constructive one. Okay, so as a summary, here are our learning points. We recognize specific stressors of pandemic among children and teens and its impact to mental health for us to be able to provide effective intervention. So we learned the essential role of psycho-emotional resilience in thriving during these challenging times. We also acquire a toolbox of effective coping skills and techniques to help children manage stress post-pandemic, promoting their emotional well-being and overall mental health. And these are my references. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Red. We cannot overemphasize the importance of building resilience in our children. It is a It is a protective factor that helps, if not offsets, challenging situations. So we now have a reaction from the Department of Education regarding today's presentation, specifically on the third topic presented by Dr. Red. May we call in Dr. Maria Corazon Dumlao, the Chief Head Program Officer of the Department of Education. Good morning, ma'am.
Maraming salamat po sa ating mga tagapagsalita na lalong nagpatibay sa ating paniniwala na tunay ngang napakahalaga ng kalusugan ng kaisipan ng mga bata, lalo na sa kasalukuyang panahon. The Department of Education sa pamamagitan ng Office of the Assistant Secretary for Operations of the Bureau of Learner Support Services sa pangunguna ng aming Execom lead na si Assistant Secretary Dexter Galvan at Bureau Director Nenet Esplana, ay kaisa sa masidhing paniniwalang ito. Pero higit sa paniniwala, kaisa ang DepEd at nananawagan din ng mga patuloy naming magiging katuwang sa adhikain ito sa pagkilos para matiyak na ang pagpapahalaga sa kalusugan ng at kaisipan ng mga bata ay naita-translate sa gawa o sa pagkilos. Binibigyan din dito ang sa matatag agenda ng kasalukuyang administrasyon kung saan may focus sa pangangalaga ng mental health at well-being ng mga guro at mga mag-aaral. Nagpapasalamat din tayo dahil may mga batas nang naisaset in place upang maging legal na batayan ng DepEd sa paglaan ng mga programa, proyekto at iba pang activities na sa pagpropromote ng mental health ng ating mga mag-aaral. So sa mental health, kinikilala namin ang aming mga tungkulin bilang isang institusyon. Una, tiyakin na maayos na nakapasok sa K-12 curriculum. Pinapangunahan ito ng aming curriculum and teaching strand. May homeroom guidance na subject area mula K-12 kung saan ginagabayan ng mga teacher advisors ang kanilang mga mag-aaral sa mga konseptong may kinalaman sa mental health. Nakapasok din ang mga relevant concept sa iba pang mga subject area gaya ng makabansa at health. Pangalawa, mandato ng department na tiyaking may adequate qualified mental health professionals sa mga paaralan. Para dyan, nangunguna naman ang aming HROD strand sa iba pang mga initiative katulad ng pagtataguyod ng comprehensive na HROD plan para sa mga guidance counselors at pagsuporta sa mga legislation na may kinalaman sa pagtataglay ng mga paglalagay ng mga health professionals sa mga eskwelahan. 3 and 4, pangatlo at pang-apat, mandato ng DepEd na mag-develop ng guidelines and standards para sa mga mental health initiatives ng mga eskwelahan at of course mag-pursue ng strategies that promote the realization of mental health and well-being. Ang HROD strand din ang nagtataguyod niyan para sa mga kawani at guro ng DepEd. Ang strand naman namin, BLSS, ang tumututok sa mga mag-aaral. Kaya na-appreciate ko ang mga presentation ngayong umaga from the situations ng mental health conditions, yung mga tools, yung mga coping skills, resiliency skills. Magagamit namin ito upang makapagpatibay or mapagtibay ang aming mga ginagawa para sa learners' health. Kasama ang DOH at ibang partner, tinataguyod natin ang mental health ng mga bata ayon na rin sa sinasabi ng batas. Una, dapat may mga ginagawa para mapataas ang awareness tungkol sa mental health issues. Ina-expand yan ng IRR ng batas sa mas malawak na mental health promotion. Gabay ang UHC law, tinitignan natin ang mental health promotion ay hindi lamang sa mga campaign o mga activity patungkol sa health skills and referral. Siyempre kasama din yan ang school resources at policy, pakikipag-ugnayan sa mga magulang at community, physical school environment at social environment. Pangalawa, sabi ng batas, kailangan matukoy natin ang mga mag-aaral at risk at mabigyan sila ng basic education. So nag-a-adapt tayo ng mga psychological assessment tool para matulungan tayo sa pagtukoy ng mga mag-aaral na pinaka nangangailangan ng mga service na to. Pinapalakas natin ang pulisiya sa guidance and counseling. Pangatlo, sabi ng batas, kailangan din na may maayos tayong referral system. So nakikipagtulungan tayo sa DOH, local government units, and with the partners, of course, para mapatatag ang referral system. Ngayong school year, ang aming strand sa pangunguna ng aming ASEC ay nag-line up ng iba't ibang mga gawain para mapalakas ang pagpapatupad ng DepEd sa mga sinasabing ito ng batas. Gusto ko rin kunin ang pagkakataong ito upang maimbitahan kayo na makasama namin sa mga gawain ito. Maaari niyong i-contact ang aming opisina, BLSS School Health Division, para sa anumang partnership opportunity, hindi lang sa mental health, kundi sa anumang aspeto ng pagtiyak sa kalusugan ng mag-aaral. Muli, maraming salamat sa mga nag-present at sa ating mga magigiting na mga organizers na appreciate namin itong initiative na to. Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Dr. Dumlao. It's a pleasure to have you here today, and we need your participation, your team. You are an important member of the mental health advocacy on children. For the updates and invitation, of course, we are more than willing to participate. We now proceed. May we invite in the Zoom room our resource persons, Dr. Moses de Guzman III, Dr. Deborah Red. Unfortunately, Dr. Darlene Pecache could not attend the open forum, but our other speakers will gladly answer your questions. May I also invite Dr. Dumlao to join us. First question, is for Dr. Red. For the interest of those who want to do some research about resilience, is there a way to measure or gauge it? And follow-up question also, how can we build resilience on an abused child, or practical tips that we can give to parents and caregivers? Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for that question, Dr. Cruz. Yeah, no, napaka-importante ngayon to have researches on resilience because of all, the challenges that we are facing, especially for children and teens. Yes, there are resilience scales or questionnaires that are available online. Yung iba, it's for free, no? But some scales comes with a fee. Okay? Depende rin, no, kung halimbawa yung age group that you want to you want to have sa research is depende sa age group din, no? There are available tools for that. So as I was doing this lecture, I was able to check on a resilience scale questionnaire for 7-year-old and above. And this is a very short questionnaire, 10-item questions lang. So you may want to check on that. And for the next question is, how do we build resilience on abused children and teens? So thank you again for that question. That is very important. Okay, we provide still the basic. And what is the basic? We provide a safe and loving environment, okay, that will hasten the healing process of these abused children. And specifically, paano ba yan? Paano ba natin gagawin, no? Number one, we validate their emotions, no? Do not tell them na forget about it, yung negative experience na yan, or forget about it, o wag mong pansinin yan, yung mga nararamdaman mo. Okay? So we have to acknowledge, no, that they may be feeling sad or, takot sila. Okay? Another one is important for these kids is to maintain yung routine. Okay? Because for this group, napaka-importante yung magkaroon sila ng structure that they're following. It somehow provides them safety. So, kunyari, before, no, binabasahan nyo before going to sleep. So, continue doing that. Okay? Eating with them sa dinner. Okay? So, continue doing that. Okay? Routine is very important. What else? Help them develop or establish yung relationship with trusted friends or adults, no? Okay. Kasi 'di ba ang isang importanteng bagay na nasira with these abused kids are yung yung trust. So we have to address that also. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Debbie. Very practical measures to help our children and healthcare workers as well. Next question is for Dr. De Guzman. Two questions actually. This is from Facebook, from Miss Lanzuela. Saan po kami pwedeng makakuha ng screening tools and ano pong range ng age para sa ating ASQ?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Okay, so you can get the ASQ from the website ng National Institutes of Mental Health, NIMH. Mas madali, i-Google nyo siya, search nyo sa Google, ASQ, Suicide Screening. Doon kayo dadalhin na doon. Nandun na siya masasama sa list ng mga i-search. There is a Filipino version na validated ni Dr. Picache na mention, isa sa mga speakers natin kanina. So you can it's free for download. You can use that for if you want the screening tool. With regards to the age range, it's actually designed for young people. So it's for ages 8 to 24 years old. Yung ASQ can be used for 8 years old and up until 24 years old. Hindi siya magagamit pa for less than 8 kasi yung study population when it was tested, hindi included yung age range na yon. It's already validated din for adults. Meron din siyang version for adults kasi it's very useful then for more than 24 years old. Yun yung age range. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Dr. De Guzman. Meron pang question for you later. So this is for Dr. Dumlao. Ma'am, are you there? What can be the important role of social workers and teachers in sustaining mental health?
As we know, ang ating mga teachers, nandun sila sa classroom where the teaching and learning process takes place. And hindi lang naman yung tinuturo yung mahalaga din na doon sa loob ng classroom, nakikita mo rin yung kabuuan ng pag-engage ng bata. So ikaw ang makakaalam ng emotional check. Ikaw yung nag-check ng kanilang emotion, yung kanilang mga needs. So ang mga teachers, kung meron silang mga red flags na nakikita, kailangan nare-refer ito sa proper health authorities. And sila rin yung katuwang ng ating mga health personnel sa pagre-refer ng mga children at risk at saka yung mga nangangailangan ng intervention. So yung ating mga social worker naman, since sila naman yung nasa community, facilitating din yung kanilang role na maka-access yung ating mga learners who are in need with basic mental health interventions. Also, syempre kasama rin ang ating mga social workers na nag-i-initiate ng mental health awareness, nagli-link sa ating mga schools sa mga ganito na mga initiatives, whether it's online or face-to-face, upang mapataas pa natin yung awareness level natin on mental health. Kasi ang mental health naman, hindi naman doon lang sa meron ka ng nararamdaman eh. Even if you're healthy, yung pag-prevent natin na magkaroon tayo ng conditions, nandun nag-i-start na yung ating health promotion and advocacy.
Salamat, ma'am. Last two questions. This is for Dr. De Guzman from Ms. Lara Mangubat. How do we approach adolescents who frequently cut their wrists?
Yes, we encountered that, yung NSSI, the non-suicidal self-injury, okay? So, kanina, if you will notice, dun sa isa sa mga slides ko, na-mention siya doon. So, classified siya as either high risk or medium risk, okay? So, what can we do if we encounter a student or a patient or a young person na merong NSSI? We have to remember that NSSI is associated with a mental health condition. It needs referral to a mental health professional. However, alam naman natin, kukonti lang, we are very limited with the number of health professionals and medyo mahaba-haba ang pila. So what can we do on our end if we encounter one? Very important na we can do our counseling. Ano yung pwede natin i-counsel sa kanila? Stress reduction techniques, adequate nutrition,
adequate sleep, physical activity, turuan natin ng mga coping skills to be more resilient, okay? And the very important din, psychoeducation, stress natin yung importance ng makita sila ng isang mental health professional the soonest possible. Safety planning, kasi we want to reduce sana yung yung severity ng kanilang injury, kunyari nagsa-slash sila or nagka-cut sila, di ba? And very important na ma-refer kagad sila sa isang mental health professional. So, thank you for that question. I hope nakatulong yung mga sinabi kong suggestions.
The last question is for the one who owns the lecture. As a summary, please briefly answer the question, what is a psycho-emotionally resilient child? Dr. Red? Dr. Red, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
A psycho-emotionally resilient child or a teenager, when faced with challenges or adversities, will show minimal stress or minimal effects on everyday life. So that's for some. But for others, they may temporarily have trouble coping, no? But they soon return to normal with positive coping strategies, which I have mentioned in the lecture. Thank you.
Any last words from Dr. De Guzman and Dr. Dumlao before we take our photo?
Yeah, ako na muna mauna. I noticed kanina majority or more than half talaga ng ating attendees this morning are social workers, okay? So very important talaga yung role ng mga social workers natin kasi sila yung nakaka-encounter ng ating mga kabataan, okay? So we need the help of our social workers in screening, okay? Yun na po yung latest recommendation na every encounter with a young person, we have to screen them. So ito pong AS Cure the Ask which I shared is very useful kasi it's very quick, okay? So very important din yung role ng mga social workers for aside from screening, of course, counseling, giving psychoeducation, and very important yung referral network with regards provision of resources for mental health. So we all have our share para at least matulungan natin, especially the adolescents and young adults who are having crisis these days. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Dumlao?
Ang prevention and treatment naman po, meron siyang iba-ibang settings. So, andyan yung school, community, workplace, family-based setting, environment, and media-based setting. So napakahalaga na lahat po ng mga settings na to magtulong-tulong to focus our resources for the implementation of yung ating mga commitments sa law. Promotion, health promotion, identification of at risk, and then providing interventions and referrals. So kailangan natin ang bawat isa. Hindi lamang iisang setting or sector ang kailangang gumalaw. Tayo po together with our generous and committed partners. Thank you.
Thank you to our esteemed speakers. Thank you very much. Okay, the next part of the session is, of course, the synthesis. I will just make this very quick. I made notes a while ago. For the first session, just like what Dr. Dar has said, a child with mental health issues is like a wobbly table who needs attention, support, and love. What we do, we address the problem, we investigate the stressors in all situations, and find remedy and treatment by using protocols and policies. We review our blueprint for suicide prevention that works best in each setting, especially the school, which is one of the child's safety net outside the home. For the lecture of Dr. De Guzman, interventions or assessments should be used, and there are ways that we can get it. Everything's downloadable. to justify and facilitate our referrals. So Dr. De Guzman extensively discussed these tools and assessments, as well as the importance of identifying psychosocial support groups. We do more than the medical aspect. So an intervention is a systematic group work that ensures safety and promotes coping. All practical measures have been highlighted in handling suicide, and this will increase better health outcomes and prevention. For Dr. Red, after the identification of problems and management of different issues, we shall focus on security, connection, support networks, which are needed for a child's meaningful growth and development. Modeling of good character starts at home and reinforced in school. And a very basic method we can all do, not just healthcare practitioners, but as individuals. Building resilience is a lifelong process. So our expertise, the learning we impart will always be needed. The highlight I have heard a while ago is we do not minimize the stressors and the impacts. So we always have to attend to this. Thank you so much. Thank you again to our resource persons, Dr. Picache, Dr. De Guzman, Dr. Red, and Dr. Dumlao. To our active attendees here on Zoom, Facebook, and Kumu, we truly appreciate you all. In behalf of our conference president, Dr. Sandra, we are very happy of your participation. Let us end this session with self-care activity. And this was given to us by Dr. Esther. I also would like to thank John and Joy for making this this presentation inclusive for those who have participated also with us. This video was given by Dr. Esther Iligan, another adolescent medicine specialist. We will teach you the calming action breathing technique.
There are times when we all experience feelings of stress or anxiety. In these moments, you can use your breath to help calm those feelings. Box breathing is a simple relaxation technique that can help you reset your breath and return to its normal rhythm. You can do it anywhere, anytime. Box breathing can help reduce stress and improve mood. It can also help with controlling and managing emotions. It's very easy to learn. Imagine breathing around a box. Inhale as you visualize going up one side of the box, gradually filling your lungs with air. When you reach the top, hold your breath for 1 to 5 seconds as you picture going across the top of the box. Exhale gradually as you imagine traveling down the other side of the box. Pause again for 1 to 5 seconds as you go along the bottom of the box. Then repeat. This can be done 7 to 10 times in a row, focusing on the breath. If you can do it sitting down with your feet grounded, that will help too. But really, it can be done anywhere. Box breathing has physiological and psychological benefits. Physiologically, it regulates breath, increases oxygen to the lungs, and can help reduce blood pressure and lower heart rate. Box breathing can help psychologically by providing focus to your breath and removing attention from the things that are causing feelings of stress and anxiety. The repetition of box breathing can also help reduce stress. So, in moments when feelings of stress and anxiety are overwhelming, remember box breathing and the power of your breath as a simple way to relax and breathe a bit easier.
Thank you, AMD, for that video. Ako si Dr. Leah Cruz. Ako tayo para sa bata.